When is a good time to use CG in your anime? Never. Thank you guys for watching. Feel free to support me on Patreon, subscribe to my channel, make sure you guys share, like, and comment. Okay, but seriously, it's not that simple. With anime becoming more and more mainstream and budgets for shows constantly shrinking, it's often impossible for studios to match that demand. CG is a necessary evil. But surprisingly, that's not the argument I will be making today. First, I just really want to delve into this topic because no matter how ugly CG is, it's kind of cool when used properly. So today, that's kind of what I want to focus on: when, where, and how to use CG in anime, along of course with how the use of CG has evolved over the years. So let's start by talking about CG and of course when to use it. Let's just be honest with ourselves, it's often because of budgetary restraints. Of course, there are exceptions, and we will get to those, but often it's a case of way too much action in a single scene to animate on a budget. So CG can get the job done with an often notable difference in quality. Of course, there are some really good rules of thumb to use when working in CG to make it not take your audience out of the story. Because after all, that's all this art form is about. Keeping your audience immersed in your story, and weird jarring cuts back and forth to CG can absolutely ruin that. That's why it's often so universally hated. Now on to talking about where to use CG. It's quite simply only on solid objects. Vehicles, buildings, any object that is not organic. Computers are really good at simulating solid objects and really bad at simulating organic objects. Yes, I'm looking at you, Berserk. And also, of course, how to use CG. It's pretty simple. Establish with your audience when you will be using it, then stick to it. Don't cut back and forth between animating it in CG sometimes and 2D other times. Pick a style and commit to it. So let's talk about one of the first anime to use CG and how they accomplished it without pulling their audience out of the narrative. Initial D. So first, let's talk about when they use CG. Obviously, when they race. Those are the most heavy action scenes in the show, and without CG, the show probably would have never gotten out of pre-production. They also only use CG during the race scenes with the exteriors of the cars. They do cut back and forth to 2D animation when they cut to the interior of the car, but all exterior shots are CG, and so it's established with the audience and it never pulls you out of the races. And finally, the CG objects are cars. Solid objects that, although they look horrible because the show is from the 90s, doesn't look like some terrifying body horror. And that's why the awesome races of Initial D are still incredibly immersive despite the use of 90s CG. So, of course, I have to give you guys examples of poorly used CG in modern anime, and oh god, it just hurts to look at. I'm honestly not sure if you guys even want to see this. Okay, here it goes. Golden Kamui, why? Jesus, who let this monstrosity on television? Not only that, in the first episode! Okay, so let's take a little bit of time to talk about why this is so wrong. First, it breaks our number one rule. Don't use organic objects. Computers are not that great at it still, if you can't tell. Secondly, look at the quality of the animation in the rest of the show. I feel like this was absolutely not a budget problem. If it was less of a lack of budget and more of a mismanagement of budget. And thirdly, if you absolutely have to use terrible CG in your show like this, just try to show it as little as possible. Do not frame it so we can see every inch of this eldritch horror looking thing you call a bear. Oh god, let me just get that off the screen. Worst of all, this terrible CG completely breaks the audience's immersion, ruining the whole purpose of creating a scene like this in the first place. So now that we got that out of the way, I kind of want to talk about how CG has changed in the past few years and of course some exceptions. Starting with one of my favorite anime of all time, Land of the Lustrous. This fully CG show came out in 2017, and although it didn't get much recognition from the community as it aired, it did slowly build up a cult following. The show is clearly very different visually speaking, since it's completely CG, but it cleverly uses the weaknesses of CG to its advantage. First off, all of the main characters are actually crystals, solid objects instead of organic objects, which makes them look much better. But uniquely enough, there are some organic objects that are still animated through CG, in particular the antagonist of the show along with the mysterious godlike figure of the show. The CG gives them this extremely off-putting look that makes them way more terrifying, helping tell the narrative. By the way, which is great and you should totally watch because I never actually got to do a video on the show and I really absolutely love it. Finally, leading me to Demon Slayer, Ufotable's newest property. This show is kind of what I've been leading up to. CG is getting way better. For instance, Demon Slayer broke all of the previous rules I mentioned in these two scenes. First, they use an organic object, i.e. the main character. Secondly, it's not established as to when they transform back and forth to CG, leading to the possibility that your audience immersion will be disrupted. Yet, it's not. Because it honestly doesn't look half bad. It's getting there, and instead of being shamelessly in your face like Golden Kamui, it's pushed further to the mid or background and meshes surprisingly well with the 2D animation. It's honestly really cool to see how far CG has come in anime and that now, with proper direction, you can even break some of these rules. I'm gonna be honest, I don't really have a message for this video. I just really wanted to talk about why some CG is totally fine and others unforgivable. It's just something I'm particularly passionate about and wanted to talk about while figuring out what seasonals I wanted to cover in more depth. Speaking of which, please leave your suggestions on what shows you guys actually want me to cover down in the comments. If you guys liked the video, make sure you guys subscribe for more weekly anime content. Most of my videos aren't usually like this, but occasionally I like to throw a wrench in things and just see how it works. A huge thank you to my patrons, you guys are my heroes. Speaking of which, if you're interested in seeing how I edit, joining our exclusive Discord, or simply supporting the channel, feel free to support me on Patreon. Make sure you guys share, like, comment, and subscribe. This is Manime Matt. Make sure you guys say man and go watch that goddamn anime!